Hello, and welcome to the Magalia Rose Studio. My name is Kathy, and if you haven't painted with me before, I'd like you to know that I am a professional artist and have taught watercolor classes to beginning through advanced artists for over 10 years. Today's demonstration painting first appears to be of two lovely birds, perhaps yellow warblers, but let's take a moment to examine what interesting lessons are embedded in this painting. First, let's think about the color of yellow. A beautiful color, abundant in nature, but not necessarily simple for the artist to utilize. Yellow can be very difficult to darken in shadow areas without losing its inherent glow. Methods such as adding a complementary color or adding a dark neutral seem to leave a very disappointing effect. Much depends on the subject you are painting, and our demonstration painting will use a variety of colors to shade and give dimension to our little yellow birds. Now let's discuss a subject I'm often asked about, the background of a painting. I am mostly asked whether I should paint the background first or last, but another important question is, do I even need to paint a background at all? The answer may be different with every painting and may depend upon how complicated the painting elements are and if masking will be required. But the most important issue, I think, would be your personal preference. Let's begin the demonstration painting with no painted background and decide if a background is needed after we have painted the main elements, the birds and the branches. So let's move on and look at the supplies we'll be needing. The demonstration painting is worked on an 1/8 sheet of cold pressed watercolor paper. That would measure about 11 by 7 inches. In addition, you will need a support board, artist's tape, masking fluid, 2 containers of water, a paper or cloth towel, and a pencil. Check on my website and a template will be temporarily available for you to use, as well as photographs of the subject birds. If these items have been taken off my website, please use the contact page and request I email you the photos and template. It is important, though, to remember, whenever you use a lesson template, you cannot present the completed work as your own. However, templates can be helpful to learn the techniques offered in a demonstration in preparation of creating your own original artwork. The colors I'm going to be using in the demonstration painting are Hansa Lemon Yellow, Azo Green, which can easily be made from a mix of your chosen yellow with a little sap green, Raw Sienna and Burnt Sienna, Ultramarine Blue, Burnt Umber, and Paynes Gray. The brushes I'll be using mostly are a number 8 and a number 10 round. I'm going to have a 1-inch flat on the side in case I do decide on a background and need a moderately wide brush, and a small stylus that I'm going to use to apply my masking fluid. Once you have assembled your supplies and have the sketch on your watercolor paper and your paper with the sketches taped to a support board, we're about ready to begin, but I first want to share a simple technique with you. If you're painting a somewhat delicate subject and prefer not to have dark pencil lines, simply press down with a kneaded eraser on the area you want to lighten. You do not have to rub, just simply press down. Here I'm lightening most of my bird areas, excepting for the feet and the beaks, because those will be darker colors, and I'm more concerned with keeping the purity of the yellow on the actual plumage of the birds. So this is something to think about before you start your painting. How many pencil lines, and do you really want them? Well, I have my template traced onto my watercolor paper. And the first thing I need to be thinking about is the direction of the light. You need to usually do this. Sometimes it's more important than others, but always a consideration. Sometimes, so that I keep my shadows consistent, in the taped area, I'll draw a little sun, just to remind me, hey, this is where the light is coming from. The next step will be to apply masking fluid. You can think about using a brush to apply masking fluid, but be sure to thoroughly coat the bristles with a soap. I use a product called brush cleaner because it is a type of soap. I wet my brush and I make sure that every bristle is fully coated in soap. Sometimes for areas I also use a stylus. You can even use a wooden skewer to apply it to different areas depending on the size of the area that needs to be covered. So I'm going to go ahead in this painting, and I have my masking fluid. I use the Grumbacher Misket. It sort of has a orange cast to it. Please don't use clear or white masking fluid. It disappears and you can't see where you've applied it. I'm going to apply masking fluid to this white area around the eye of the little bird to the left. This is probably the male. He has a little more color to him. I'm going to apply that. And then I'm going to think about the highlights on the legs. The light's coming from this direction. So I'm just going to apply a little dot that might be a highlight on the leg and the toes of the bird. I'm looking at this particular little bird, and I'm going to also, even though this is a dark area, I'm going to add a little masking and a little bit here. Don't overdo the masking. And I think that's going to be all the masking. Well, let's let it dry, and then let's begin to paint. Now that my masking fluid has dried, I'm going to begin by activating the colors I'm going to be used to first what I call block in the bird on the left. I'm going to activate my Hansa yellow, my azo green, my raw sienna, and my burnt umber. Just takes a moment for those paints to get ready to be used. I'm going to make a fairly dilute mix of the Hansa lemon yellow. Always have a test sheet nearby. And I'm going to begin with the crown of the bird. I'm not going to worry about those dark areas because they can just cover any yellow that may enter into that area. Keep your reference photo nearby when you begin painting. It shows me that there's a little more intense area in here of the yellow. I'm going to also bring a little bit of the yellow up into this wing area, because you can see from my reference that some of the yellow does peek through a bit. I'm now going to bring in my raw sienna, and I'm going to make sure it's pretty dilute. And I'm going to bring it into this nice warm area that's under the yellow and into the belly of the bird. If you want to lighten an area because the sun's coming, just use your dry brush and soak up some of that color. Now I'm going to bring in the burnt umber. And remember, we're just blocking in. This isn't going to be the final, but we're going to have a good idea where those colors are going to be light and dark. More shadow, of course, down here. And don't worry if you leave a few white spots. That's okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and block in that wing with some of the burnt umber, letting it maybe bleed in just a little bit to that yellow. Okay, that's about all I'm going to do right now for my bird on the left. I'm going to work on my bird on the right now, but I'm going to speed that one up. I've pretty much finished the second bird. I just basically kind of skipped the whole thing because you've seen how this process is done. This little guy needs to just have a few more touches, a little more of the azo green, which you can get by mixing your yellow with a little bit of sap green. It's sort of a greenish yellow. I like the azo, which is also known as golden green, because it is a single pigment, so it keeps a lot of nice lustrous look to everything. Don't overbrush, just kind of let a few flicks indicate feathers. And I think right now our little second bird is done. My birds have been blocked in and they're totally dry. And I'm going to begin doing some of the detailing work of the plumage. But again, you can always come back. Less is better in the beginning. I have a mixture of burnt umber and azo green to give me sort of a greenish brown. And as you can see, I have started following my reference photograph, putting in the darks. You're always going to be able to come back and do more darkening, but again, you're sort of setting up a pattern, a roadmap on how the plumage is going to look. Just flick your brush. You always can come back if you need more. And as areas develop, you may want, as you see areas that are darker, you can always come in with pure burnt umber and darken those areas. Follow the direction of the plumage. That's very important in this stage. Vary the length. Okay. Now I'm going to let this area sit because I'm going to come back again. I'm not done. If you find an area is too dark, this is simple to correct. If you don't need to go back to white, you can simply dampen a tissue, paper towel or cloth, and gently apply it and lift. We sometimes panic when we see something has gone a little too dark. Don't. There's so many things we can do to fix that. Again, I can come back later and put some more detail in. I'm going to use my number 8. Now I'm going to quickly move on to part of the wing, and I'm going to use that same azo green and burnt umber brown. And as I can see, here are some very detailed wing feathers, but I'm not going to worry about those too much. I'm going to leave them a little bit, but I'm going to come in and sort of put in a bit of, again, using that larger brush with the same flicking motion, making that yellow still shine through a little bit. I'm leaving those feathers there sort of undone. Again, we don't have to go for the completed bird. We're just sort of setting up areas that will be intensified and detailed later. I have this nice area down in here of shadow, and again, I'm going to add a little bit more of the burnt umber to that mix, and I'm going to watch this carefully, and I'm going to kind of put in some of these feather areas. that are shadowed. Okay, I'm going to continue with the bird with these sim techniques, but I'm going to speed that up so that you can follow along and yet not take a lot of time. It's now time to activate my Paynes Gray, and I'm going to paint in the beak. I'm using my number 8 round, and I'm going to go ahead and rinse off my brush, dry it a little bit on a towel, and lift that upper edge of the beak where the highlights might be, and redarken any areas that should be darker. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the little legs and feet. Remember, I put some masking fluid in these areas, so they will be preserving some of the highlight, perhaps, that the light is putting on that bird's foot. Another thing to remember is it will probably be a little darker in the shadow areas where his body's going to be shadowing his leg. Now that that part's done, I'm going to look at my other little bird, and she has a lot less color in her, but I'm going to just go ahead and use some of my imagination and give her a little bit more color. If you will notice on the photograph, she has some nice greens in here, so I can activate a little bit of my azo green and put into that tail area and shade it a bit. She also has some nice green toward this little wing area, but it's interspersed with the yellow, so I'm not going to make it a solid green. And I can even darken that with a little bit of burnt umber where I think there might be a little bit of shadowing. Now we have this area of burnt sienna that I have marked following her pattern here a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and just use a little bit of this azo burnt umber mix and put in some shading in some of these areas. And a few little feathery marks. Remember, you're not reproducing this as a photograph. This is an interpretive piece. You want to give the sense of the bird. And that's where you can use a little bit of imagination if you see areas that should be darker. To give her shape. As we've discussed, yellow is a tough one at times, because to make it darker we almost have to use another color. Okay, I'm pretty much going to go ahead and continue on, and I will do her beak and legs in the same manner as I did the bird on the left. Once all the paint is completely dried, I use a pickup tool and I remove all the masking, legs and around the eyes and anywhere else I may have put it for highlights. Try not to use your fingers. You can use an eraser, you can use tape, but fingers will possibly leave some type of oil. I'm going to use burnt sienna, and I'm going to paint both their eyes the same, even though the bird on the right doesn't really show too well in the photograph what its eye is. It makes a nice change from just doing a flat black eye, because we will be putting a pupil and highlights in there. As far as the leg and the feet are concerned, you can see where the masking fluid's left somewhat of a hard line. I like to come in and with just a damp brush begin to soften that line and bring some of that color to the highlighted area. It just takes a little bit of dampening and a little rubbing to get the effect we're looking for. The nice thing about watercolors is, in some degrees, it's pretty malleable. You can move things around a little bit even once they're dry. Okay, I'm going to put in a little bit of darkening over here. And it went a little bit over, so I'm just going to grab my little cloth and push it in a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to let those things dry before we move forward. I'm going to move on to the little branches the birds are sitting on right now. And I'm first going to go ahead and just use an extremely dilute mix of raw sienna and just number 10, nice big brush, a brush that gets a lot of paint down quickly. And I'm just going to put in those little preliminary branch areas. If the paint of the feet and such are nice and dry, a little dab of this will not bother them at all. I'm going to add a little additional raw sienna mix, while this is somewhat damp, to the bottom and shadow areas. Give a little sense of roundness to the branches. And we can let those branches dry a little bit. I'm now going to use some Paynes Gray, and I'm going to simply, with my small number 2 round, outline that burnt sienna area of the eye. And if you'll notice on my little reference photo, there is this interesting little area here, and I'm just going to pull that in with the Paynes Gray and dab it into those areas. I'm going to outline the other bird just exactly the same, although she's not having as large a white area around her eye. And since I have a nice small sharp brush, I'm going to put a few little talons in here onto her feet. Okay, I'm going to also take that Paynes and come on the underside of a few of these wing feathers that need a little more definition. Okay, let's let those dry. I'm going to return to the branches, and you can use a brush and simply shadow some of these areas that are on the underside from the light, but I'm going to sort of take a quick shortcut and use an old credit card that's been cut. I'm going to dip it into some burnt umber and put it at the edge and simply pull some of that color up a little bit. I can come back later with a brush and smooth some of those edges out and add to the effect of being a shadowed area with a little bit of texture. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the rest of the branches, and so you can see how that is handled. Now, one of the last things we need to do is to put the pupil of the eye of each bird in. When that pupil is completely dry, I can be putting in a highlight with gouache. So I'm going to use my number 2 round Paynes Gray and simply come in and make a little pupil. First on the bird on the left, and then on my bird to the right. I'll let those dry before I even think about doing a highlight, and then we can come back and evaluate what we've done so far. It's time to step away from your painting for a bit. Put it in different lights and different positions. You can put a working mat around it, and this will help you see what needs to be changed and what details need to be added. I've decided that I need to add a little spatter to the branches, darken the breast of the bird on the left, and darken the right or shadow side of the bird on the right. Maybe flick in a few feather details here and there. And lastly, I'll add a dot of white gouache to the eyes of both birds. Let's speed up that process. Well, here are 2 little birds sitting on their branches, and I'm about done right now. I am thinking of putting in a blue background with maybe some clouds, but that will be later on. Right now, I'm just going to let them sit and consider them done. I've enjoyed painting with you, and I hope you will revisit Magalia Rose Studio and see what other projects we have, and let's paint together.